Welcome, everybody. This is the sixth and final session of the second quarter of the new and improved NMC Neurosequential Model and Caregiving series. You all have really gone through a lot of content, and it's pretty impressive, actually, when you look at all the different concepts that you have been exposed to and talked about a little bit. And those of you who have actually been part of the first series, if you put all of that together, it's actually quite an impressive array of content. Interestingly enough, um, I have to say, many of these concepts are not formally taught to people who go through medical school. And again, one of the things I think we run into all the time with carers, whether it's adoptive parents, biological parents, um, adoptive parents, people who do a lot of work with children who have hard developmental starts, is that they're really make good observations and they do a lot of self-study. And it's not unusual for them to come in and talk to their pediatrician or some other clinician or a teacher and give them really good insights about what they're seeing and what they think's going on, and then to have it dismissed. It really is one of the more, I think, pervasive experiences of people who work with children who are struggling, and is that you kind of get bounced around and your perspective is minimized. And so I just, I said that basically because the set of slides I'm going to show you um, today, I originally created for grand rounds at Northwestern University Medical School about 30 years ago. And part of what I was trying to convey to that population was that they were misunderstanding the complexity of the children that were coming in with histories of trauma and attachment chaos and all kinds of other stuff. The kids that you all are familiar with. And 30 years later, some of these concepts are sort of filtering into the mainstream of medicine and mental health and psychology and psychiatry, which is good. But it's kind of heartbreaking that it has taken 30 years and probably hundreds of thousands of shaming, marginalizing, dismissive interactions between parents that are struggling and professionals that know everything. So I just want to say that because I think I just want to remind you that even though we're doing this series, we don't know everything either. Um, we, I think really the hallmark of this organization is to continually listen and learn. And that's part of what I would like to have happen in part of this series. I know we have these discussion components, and we really do value feedback and what we hear and your thoughts about whether we're effectively communicating things or not, whether we're addressing your questions, which I can guarantee you we're not, because the number of questions and the complexity of the questions is beyond the ability for us to manage these in a 3-minute answer. With that said, what I want to say is that we are going to put a pause on this NMC series and come back with some way to actually address some of these questions in a meaningful way. Um, there's a couple of things that we've thought about, and we'd love input from you about what seems to make sense to you. When we teach people this clinical approach, the NMT, we use case-based teaching. So we'll take an individual child, we'll kind of look at them in kind of in depth, and then we'll have a conversation and a discussion after we have done some of the NMT assessment components. And it really sometimes can be really helpful, but mostly it's a good way for the clinicians who are watching to learn to think a different way, just to learn about development, to kind of think and remember that, oh yeah, the brain's involved in this and so forth. Um, Once in a while, we stumble upon some good recommendations that are helpful for a family, but you know, this is really challenging work. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today is the the challenge of changing and sort of developmentally optimizing experiences for somebody who is either developmentally behind or who has some kind of other brain-mediated functional challenge. And it could be reading, or it could be fine motor control, it could be forming and maintaining relationships. But there are certain principles about this that I think would be helpful for you. And I'm gonna talk about that in a minute. But I think what we will be, there's a couple things that we might do. I mean, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to take a lot of the questions that were submitted in those forms, and I'm going to go ahead and just see if I can frame them and answer them, and I'll create sort of a standalone Q&A. It's not going to be interactive. It's just I'm going to read the questions, and I'm going to go, all right, listen, this is what I think is going on, and this is a concept, and this might be something to think about. It's not going to be clinical advice. It's just going to be sort of um, trying to apply this neurosequential model lens to those issues, and maybe point in the direction where you could get some more information and a little bit of help. The second thing I would like you guys to give us input on is that we're actually thinking about having the next series be much, much more around um, specific challenges that you may be facing. And it could be something like school refusal, or it could be soiling, sort of encopresis and it just doesn't get better, or it could be they steal, or they hoard, or they have eating disorders, lots of the kinds of things that you are familiar with seeing. And then we will have a more, now that there has been an introduction to some of these core principles, it's so much easier to have a conversation with all of you about what we think might be going on, so that when we make a suggestion, it doesn't feel like we're just telling you what to do. When we make a suggestion, it'll feel more like a collaborative problem solving process, right? You'll know about state dependent functioning, or you'll know about I'm going to talk a lot about the repetitions required to kind of make change. So it will be a different process. And so we're going to go after this session is over, and over the next probably a couple of months, and talk through the best way to come back and do quarter three, which will be much more clinically focused. And when I say clinically, I just mean much more problem oriented and relevant to everyday implementation of these ideas. So that's what we're going to do. One of the biggest ish things that I think we will come back to again and again and again and again is, how long does it take for Billy to get better? So we're doing the right thing. How long is this going to take? Is it six weeks? I mean, we're only funded to see somebody for 20 sessions, and I can guarantee you that's not going to be enough. But I want to talk to you a little bit about this so that it will have you'll have a better understanding of why the progress feels glacial sometimes. And then every once in a while you see a quantum leap. You're like, wow, that's very encouraging. So hold on to your horses. I'm gonna change uh, to my slides, and we'll get going. This session is gonna be a little bit different. We'll have time for conversation and stuff, but I I'm going to take some time to talk about these concepts. All right. So I spent all night. No, I was up all night doing this. No, I wasn't. I lied. But I did update some of the older slides that I created back in 1996, which were literally slides. I mean, I had to look at them in with the light on it. They were slides. All right. So that's that. Let's go here. This is what we're going to talk about. I may not do this. I don't know if we have enough time, but I'm going to talk about um, functional IQ. You know, a lot of you, I mean, one of the things that we presented was state-dependent functioning. And you may remember that in a state of fear, your functional IQ, in other words, the present capacity for you to use abstract thinking collapses, right? So your problem solving or the solution to the immediate moment isn't going to reflect what you truly have in your brain. And state dependent functioning, for example, is at play when you have test anxiety or all kinds of things. And a lot of our kids are so reactive in their stress response that the tiniest little frustration can put them in a state where functionally they're not really able to reflect how smart they are. In fact, they will do things that are outright stupid. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Then I'm going to talk about the relationship between that concept of sort of a distribution of capacity for cognition. You know, IQ is sort of this, it's a defined quality, and people measure it. But really what it's tapping into is certain cognitive capabilities and maybe some social capabilities. But it doesn't tell you really anything about fine motor control, right? Or heart rate regulation or respiration or other brain mediated functions that have relevance for everybody. So 30 years ago, when I was trying to talk to people, my colleagues in psychiatry, about that they understood the concept of IQ because they used it all the time, right? That there was a distribution in the population of, you know, this measured capacity. And this is sort of cognitive things, right? How well do you think? How well do you plan? How well do you recall? You know, all of that stuff. And there was this kind of distribution. This isn't quite a normal curve, but kind of. So there were people that had very high IQs and people that had very low IQs. And in fact, we somewhat artificially created these sort of boundaries that below that you were considered, you know, compromised. We gave it labels. The labels have changed in this day and age. But down here, these folks struggled, right? Up here, these folks were, and this is an interesting thing, this is sort of an element of privilege. If you have a high IQ and you learn stuff easily, you're not even aware of how freaking lucky you are. Life is just so much easier for you when you have the capacity to kind of figure out what's going on faster. Keyword there is faster, faster. Keep that in mind. So now this really isn't IQ. This is really true of every capability, right? You could put a distribution of, all right, let's look at fine motor control, or let's look at who's got athleticism, or who's kind of got this gregarious kind of social comfort that they're able to kind of go into an interaction and meet new people and feel good about it. So literally, you can pick any brain-mediated capability, right? And that's kind of what the NMT does. It takes a brain-mediated capability like, oh, heart rate regulation. So there's a box in the NMT metric for cardiovascular respiration. And what it really, if you looked at within that box, there'd be kind of a normal distribution. And at the top, you get a 12. And if it's really low, your heart doesn't beat, you get a 1. So this is kind of, we use this concept all the time. So what I did was I introduced this concept that if you take all of these cortical capabilities that are essentially measured with, quote, formal IQ testing, you get an IQ with a distribution. The truth is, just like I said, you could look at all kinds of aspects of social functioning, the ability to read and respond to others, the capacity to understand how close to stand and when to butt in a conversation and when to butt out. All of these social qualities, you could do the same thing. There's some people that are like really, really good at it, and some people that are not good at it. And this is what I refer to as the regulation quotient. There were some people that just were really very, very, very tuned up and could not regulate anything. And then there were some people that were very well regulated. And so what I did when I was, where's my little, can I erase here? Let me erase all the ink. Okay. So here's what I did. And we used to do this. This was the beginning of our NMT metric. I would have these upside down triangle things with an RQ, SQ, and an IQ. And we would find kids that had high IQs. And then the parents would go, I don't understand why Billy, who gets A's in math, has no friends. Well, he had like an SQ he just had no clue socially what the hell he was doing. And he's kind of in the middle here with regards to sort of motor, kind of general regulatory capabilities. And so we started to create these little things for each kid. We sit down and we talk with a parent and we say, all right, Billy does not have a very, he struggles academically, but you know what? He's a very sweet kid. Actually, I should change the color here. Let me erase everything. So let me give you a couple examples. Oops, I want to erase all the ink on the slide. There we go. Now, let's do purple. All right. Here's a child right here. Tell me if you have any idea what that presentation would be like. Count one, count two, count three. I'll tell you, this is a child with Down syndrome. He really was not good in, that's a lot of those cognitive things, but he was the sweetest guy. He was kind, he was supportive, very nurturing, and he was pretty well regulated, right? I mean, he could tolerate a lot of shame and marginalization and all kinds of frustration. He was pretty good. Now, let me show you another one. This is a high IQ, low here, and kind of right in here. This is my accountant. Smart as hell, but he's got the social skills of a toad. Uh, um, that's, and so the bottom line is you can place people on these spectrums. Now, that was the first point I was trying to help them understand. The second point I was trying to help them understand is that there's a relationship between essentially where you are on this distribution of kind of capability and how many repetitions are required for you to learn something. So if you're blessed to have kind of like this high cognitive capability, what I believe this is related to is the ease with which you can actually absorb new content and make a new synaptic connection. It has to do with repetitions. And so you require fewer repetitions if you are over here. And the same person or the same capability when presented to somebody who is not blessed with that speed of acquisition, they require 800 repetitions to kind of get to the same place. And anybody who's worked with kids that have sort of these developmental struggles, you know what I'm talking about. But here's the great news, and this is what's really important. Once you get to the acquisition of that capability, they have that capability. It just takes a lot more repetitions. Now, the problem is the adult world and the traditional academic world does not tolerate the number of repetitions required to build mastery about some mathematical concept into the brain of a child who struggles with that. They're not dumb. You get them to the point where they finally get it, they will be fine. The problem is not with the child. The problem is with us. We are not matching the what would be an appropriate number of opportunities for the child to express that potential in in their brain. It's like sport. There are people that are incredibly naturally gifted, and they only need 30, 40 repetitions to be able to master some sort of motor capability. And then there's some people that require like a lot more. They need 500 repetitions to kind of get to the same point. But if you work hard, and you see this in sport all the time, if you go and shoot your 150 free throws after practice every day, you're going to be better at free throws than somebody who is really skilled and only does 10 a day. So they're really, this is kind of where that whole concept of grit, the people who basically stay with it, stick with it, and essentially help build repetitions into their own life. They practice their violin. They practice, they do repetitions, and then they get mastery. Now, let's talk about mastery. All of you, I know every single one of you are thinking, but what about state-dependent functioning and this capability? I know you're thinking about that. I know you are because you've been listening so well. So here we go. Let's talk about this. Here's the same population at rest. And then all of a sudden, you put that population, either an individual in that population or the whole group under threat. And guess what happens? The whole capacity to express that is shifted. And this has to do with everything. Your social skills deteriorate when you're under threat. Your motor skills deteriorate when you're under threat. Your cognitive skills deteriorate under threat. And of course, what does that then mean if you have a sensitized stress response? That means you get over here every time you get a little bit frustrated. I can't tie my shoes. And you stay frustrated when you go into your first class in school. What that means is you're going to have this temporary shift in capacity to learn, which is going to do what? It's going to change the number of repetitions that you will require. Let's say you're over here. This is where your real potential is. And you're sort of here on the distribution. And really what that means is you only require 30 repetitions under normal conditions to learn something. But if you get distressed, you move over here and all of a sudden you require 120 repetitions. Right? You guys see this every day. Now, the other thing about this, and this is something that, we can come, obviously I don't want to take all day to talk about this. But once you sort of have created the neurobiological apparatus that allows you to express a capability, it's still relatively fragile. You need more repetitions to make it stronger and stronger and stronger, right? The first time you shoot a free throw, wow, you're not done. You demonstrated the neuromotor capability to shoot a free throw, but you need to practice so that it becomes mastered and then automatic. And so this is a big part of what we see all the time. And this has to do with how the brain organizes and develops from the bottom up and the inside out. The latest things that we've learned that are kind of cortical are the first things that we lose under threat, right? You don't forget how to walk, right? You still know how to walk. You still know how to suck. That's a neurobiological built-in mechanism. It's you can suck really well even when you're threatened. So there's a real difference between a capability that has been acquired through repetition and then a capability that has been mastered through repetition and then a capability that is automatic through repetition. And this is something that, again, we see this all the time. Here's another place where a lot of our kids struggle. They will have developed the capability in a somewhat fragile way so they can demonstrate it when they feel safe and they're in a one-on-one interaction with a parent or a teacher. But as soon as pressure is added to that situation, i.e., I'm going to test you and I'm not there to relationally scaffold you one-on-one, they can't perform the same way. And it's the same thing for you guys. I don't know how many of you have ever had to testify in court, right? You sit there and you think you know it, and blah, 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 and you repeat it with your supervisor, and then you get up in front of court and you have brain freeze. State-dependent functioning influences everything, right? And so this is why we talk about regulation. Regulation is so important because what it does is it allows you to essentially have experiences, have a number of repetitions that will help you begin to internalize and build the precursor and then ultimately the fundamental architecture that gives you the capacity to do something. But if you're threatened, that capacity to do things disappears. Now, I'm not telling you something we didn't talk about using different images, but what I'm trying to do is link this up to the issue, the number of repetitions required to demonstrate a capability. A lot of kids need more. For whatever their genetic gifts are, whatever their developmental pathway is, everybody is somewhere on this distribution, right? Everybody is somewhere. And so, you know, depending upon where you are, that will play part of a role in how many repetitions is required. And in other words, what's the stage? And then what's the state? So this same person, if they get threatened, they're going to functionally be here and they're going to require many, many, many more repetitions to acquire the same content. Same thing socially, right? I mean, I'm very socially, I'm like probably down here. And so when I go and I meet people, like I go give a talk, right? I should feel pretty competent after I give a presentation, but people come up and go, "Hey, this is Dr. So-and-so," and I'll see them 30 seconds later, and I have no freaking idea what their name is. I don't. It's like I recognize you, but what's your name again? It's because I'm anxious in that social interaction, and it shuts down the part of my brain that would normally easily store a tiny bit of cognitive information, which is a name. All right. So this is important. This sort of the demonstration of splinter capabilities you all are familiar with, right? Now, but really what I want you to keep, you see it, but I want you to understand it. You also see that not only are there splinter capabilities, but they flicker, right? It's like, wow, it's that capability is there and then it's not. And then it's there and then it's not. And it drives you crazy because the way we create our interactions with another person are based upon our understanding of how they work. So like when we interact with the 2-year-old, we're not talking about linear algebra. We're going, all right, this is what a 2-year-old can understand. And we communicate with them and we demonstrate and we tolerate what they do and we correct them when we do all this stuff. But if you've got a 10-year-old and at 8 in the morning, he has like a 10-year-old capacity to do something. And then 30 minutes later, he has a 5-year-old's capacity to do something. Your two problems. One is it's really hard to tell when they're 5 or 4 or 2 or 8. And then you have to have like 7 different versions of how to interact in your back pocket so you use the right one. It's impossibly challenging. And so again, the more regulated somebody is, the more consistent they're going to be in the demonstration of these capabilities, which means that if you're trying to address one of the capabilities, whether it's a cognitive task or a relational task or a motor task, if you get them regulated first, you're going to have a higher probability of pulling the right intervention card out of your pocket. All right, I'm going to stop there. Um, I want to discard this. Um, Stop sharing. All right, so that's my didactic, and I'm sticking to it. Um, is this where we have Q&A typically? Some conversations, comments, any thoughts about any of this stuff? No thoughts. Holy hell.
I always have it always makes me think of an example. So I was thinking about when you were talking about presenting, and I was training last week, and there was no clock in the room I was training in. And so the facilitator was trying to help me. And so she would say 15 minutes, but I wouldn't know if she meant I've been going for 15 minutes or I have 15 minutes. And so she was really wanting me to try to do math and also continue training at the same time. And I kept going, I have no idea where I am time wise. And she just kept looking at me like, I keep telling you, the time. And so later I was like, I really need a visual because I cannot do math and talk at the same time. And so now I'm going to take a little clock with me wherever I go so that I can see it so people aren't yelling at me and trying to do math at the same time.
You know what,
So
Michelle, I love that because this is such a classic, simple example of where we expect more of children than we can
yes,
demonstrate at a doctoral
yes,
level presenting. I mean, it's crazy.
yeah,
If a kid did
exactly.
that to us, we would get pissed at them, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And she was looking at me like I was crazy. Like, you can't add, 15 minutes. And I was just like, every time she would say something to me, it would mean nothing. Like it would just totally that didn't help me at all. Yeah.
Tiff, unmute yourself.
Okay. So I have wanted to ask this question for a lot of years. I'm a little bit scared because I'm afraid you're going to say this is not even a thing. Okay. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Now
So
I'm nervous. I'm like,
I
uh-oh.
know, I know. Okay.
Jeez.
So I noticed this with my own son first, and then now I've seen it with a lot of kids that I've worked with. So I'm just going to see what you have to say about this. Um, because I think it goes with what you're talking about. And I'm just going to describe it with my son because it's the easiest way to describe it. So a lot of kids, just like you're talking about how they can't do stuff. What I've seen is when we've been working with them in this sort of neurosequential way for a long time, um, with you know, working with dosing over time. What happens that I've seen is something that they couldn't do. And for my son, it was reading. We did, reading, all kinds of reading specialists and all of that. And he was at a second grade level for a long, 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 long time. And finally, when he was 12, there was something that captured his interest.
Hmm.
So it was comic books. My husband got his old comic books out. So it was comic books, then graphic novels. Then he went from comic books to graphic novels to Steve Jobs' autobiography
Wow.
in like a span of like 7 weeks. Um, he went that fast.
Yeah.
Um, and because it had his interest, and I'm wondering, and I mean, that's an extreme example of how fast, but
But
I've
Tiff,
seen,
it's interesting that you say that. So first of all, yes, I've seen this. That's actually the developmental trajectory that's more predictable. In I don't know if I don't think I really showed it before, but can you guys see my hands? So during development, the acquisition of any, particularly any complex capability in the central nervous system, it doesn't go, it's not linear. It's not like you have 5 repetitions and you go 5 units up and then 10 it actually, there's this interesting accumulation period. I envision it a little bit like what happens when you're like building a house. If you've ever seen how they get all tons of effort is focused on getting the lumber in and bringing all the products in and getting dirt in the right place, and nothing's happened. You have nothing, but you have to bring all the stuff and get it in the right place so that when you start building, you can actually have stuff available in there and so forth. So all of the reading stuff that he was exposed to before, the words, and this is how you do it, and whatever, it was accumulating in his central nervous system. And then when that sort of there's this period where there's like a quantum leap in functional capability. And for him, it sounds like it was, I am interested in this. So I'm going to take all these things that have been accumulating and put them together. It's like having all of the appropriate Lego pieces together. And this is boring. This is a boring map. This is a boring map. I'm not going to really do it. But oh, this is cool. I want to make the space shuttle. And you just go, vroom, you got the space shuttle. And you're like, wow, that's an incredibly complex thing. I was just trying to teach you how to make little square houses. And that's the way the brain works. This is why we're trying to, when we talk about development, we talk a lot about sort of this plateau period. And then actually, usually what you see is sort of a deterioration in functioning and then a quantum leap. But that's a very common developmental phenomenon. For me, the lesson is, and I think the lesson for all of us is, when there's self-motivation, when there's motivation, internal motivation, changing the brain's easy. I mean, it just leads to more and more and more repetitions. That's why when we talk about, I talk about the 6 R's, or how many, I don't know how many R's we have anymore, but the R's. There's the 3 R's and the 6 R's, and people go, "Oh, I love the R's." I'm like, which R's are you talking about? We put rewarding in there.
Yeah.
So an optimal developmental environment is like, if something's not rewarding, you're just not going to do any of the repetitions. But if it's rewarding, you're going to do the repetitions. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's a great example, Tiff, because a lot of people get frustrated by the plateau period. There's like, wow, I'm just putting in energy and energy and energy and energy. And again, another analogy that I use, it's like boiling water. You put a ton of energy into this big freaking thing, and you're like, what's going on? Half the time, if you would walk away and go, this doesn't work. But at some point, it just boom, you reach this threshold level and it just takes off. So
Bruce, it also makes me think, for those of you who are with little kids, babies learning, like when they learn to talk,
yeah,
typically developing children, when they talk to, it's like you do a little word, a sound, a word, a little word, and then all of a sudden they're like, woof, like out of nowhere,
yeah.
sentences.
Yeah.
After the first sentences, and they do that serve and return with the parent, and then all of a sudden everything, but I think it's for those
Yeah.
of that, I think that's because that also happens like that, right? But it's been 18 months of like tree, window,
Yeah.
things like that. So,
Exactly. And the fun thing, I just love watching them practice a paragraph. And it's the prosody of a conversation. And there's sort of the
yeah.
approximation of a word. You're like, what the hell is that? It's very cute, but it doesn't last long enough. I think Robin Williams had that persisted. He was able to kind of.
And then Tiff, I think the relational piece that you described, it was you and your husband choosing something that you liked, that he knew you liked. So I think that's the reward. It's not just he acquired it, but it's also he saw what it became between the two of you.
Right. Which is, by the way, rewarding.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
yeah, thank you
Awesome.
so much.
You bet. Catherine.
Yeah, and what Tiff was talking about too, in unschooling groups and home learners, you hear a lot more of that happening, where they're like, they can't read, they're not reading on their own. And then all of a sudden, they start doing that because they're just more interest-based than they are like our traditional school. Anyhow, I I'm an adoptive parent, which I knew more of this way back when we adopted our children 20 years ago, but it just totally validates experience I had with my son who was in third grade who um, struggled with math problems, not
Mm.
at home, but at school. And I went and talked to the teacher. And because me as a kid, I hated time math problems, timed anything. And I said, just put him in a secluded area and don't show him the time.
Mm.
Just when he comes out of that room, just mark down the time. Sure enough, the first time, bang, he got it, you know? But when he was put under pressure, like you're
Right.
saying, his capability just went down. And I think about how often we have done that to kids in our
Oh,
education system, not
yeah.
just kids who, have special needs. And then we go, oh, they hate math. Well, yeah,
Right.
look at all the
Everybody hates something
put on
that they
that.
fail at, right?
Right.
Particularly in semi-humiliating way. The reason I think that's so nice to hear, Catherine, is that the school was responsive, right? And I think one of the bigger issues that we run into, I kind of mentioned it at the outset, is that a parent will know their child and they'll go in and they'll tell the teacher, hey, just give them some time. And the teachers go, we don't do that, or we can't do that, or we don't have the accommodations, blah, blah, blah. And you kind of feel bad for them because they've got like 20 different kids that are struggling and they're trying to figure it out. But I just wish we could decompress the educational process in a way that would allow healthier learning to take place. That's exactly what's happened in Finland. Finland was one of the worst Western nations in education, but they came over to the US and studied best practices and research. And they went back to Finland, and Finland's all of a sudden doing great stuff. And the best practices that they studied were like long recesses, fewer tests, professionalized educators, all kinds of stuff like that. None of which we do, but it's all of our academic educators did the research to prove that that's the best way to do things, but we won't implement it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't want to
And my
get off on that.
background's in education too, so the teacher was willing to probably listen to me. Also, when I
Exactly.
go into things, sometimes I'll say, well, and Dr. Bruce Perry says,
Uh-oh.
and
Well,
then I'll go blah, blah, blah.
yeah, that's kind of a mixed blessing. Some places they'll just throw you out the door. Say, get out of here. Thank you. All right. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Mm,
Bruce, I love the explanation of repetition and how much time it takes to change the brain, because that is the frustration I see in my teachers. We'll
mm,
talk about an intervention, we'll talk about something that will help a child regulate and how often you do it. And they may do that for 3 days. And then
right.
they're like,
Right.
it didn't work.
Yeah, I
Like,
know.
it's only been 3 days.
Yeah.
Or the child will get regulated and they'll have a whole day of no meltdowns. And then the next day there's meltdowns. And I'm like, well, did you do joint compressions? Did you do this like we talked about? And they'd say, well, no, this is the first time they melted down. And so they don't
Wow.
understand, you do it no matter what. It is the consistency of doing it that is going to make those meltdowns start to decrease over
Yeah,
time. So yeah, it's nice to hear it takes a long time.
it does. It does take a long time. I used to sort of give this rule of thumb, not necessarily that the process would be mirrored, but if I would have people who would come, educators and other clinicians, clinical teams we were consulting to, and the child's history would be like 8 years of horrible stuff, multiple placements and early attachment problems and abuse and neglect. It would just be horrific. And they would have been in treatment for like 6 months. And they're like, well, this is like, I can't believe how little progress they made in 6 months. I'm like, well, how, it took 8 years to get here.
Yeah.
For 8 years, when the brain is most malleable and organizing in important ways, it did not get what it needed. You are not going to reverse that in 6 months.
Right.
My frustration is, and this is why we spend a lot of time in policy, or we don't really, they never listen to us, but we try. If people don't understand this, then they create systems like ours. I mean, our education system, our mental health system, our child welfare system, even these well-intended things that are the law, right? You have to make a decision about permanency within a certain period of time. Now, that was well-intended, but again, what it did was just sort of tried to create this one-size-fits-all cookie cutter approach that really was developmentally insensitive and sort of culturally insensitive to a lot of families and kids. And I don't know, one of the hallmarks of the neurosequential model is that we keep trying to remind people about the individual trajectory, the individual pathway that somebody's taken really necessitates an individual problem-solving process. But that's a challenge for a lot of people. It's just they get overwhelmed. A teacher thinks, "Oh my God, how can I have 30 different curriculum for one classroom?" And we, again, our NME team has done such a great job engaging and explaining that that's not exactly what we mean. Um, but it's it's an ongoing battle. But we persist, right? All right, what do we got here? Are we supposed to, any other comments, thoughts, questions, or are you going to go into, I don't even know, where are we? We're like 45 minutes into this. Is that where we are, kind of? Michelle, when do we usually do a smaller group thing?
We usually go into them now and then come back out and finish all together again.
Okay, good.
Yep.
All right, who's the small group guru? Emily,
Yes,
is that you?
it is. But you'll need to
Small-
make me a co-host so that I can
Oh, I
do.
do. Yes. Okay, I will make you. I'll make you the whole host if you want.
Thanks.
Did anybody grab the questions?
Oh, geez. Here, I'll put them in the chat section.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just gonna let those pop up before I open the rooms.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. All
Does that
right.
stay when you go to small groups? Do you still see the chat?
Yes.
Wow. Wow. So I can type all kinds of stuff in there. Pay attention.
No, you won't see anything after you go in, but you
Oh,
retain
okay.
that's why we have to put them in before they
So
go
I
in.
can't mess with the small groups. All right. All right. See you later.
Anybody need a reminder of their room? Okay, hold on just 1 second. Let me pull it up. Right. Sheer in group 2 or room 2.
Hi, team. I'm not protesting. I just am crunching data. So I've been listening,
No.
but I'm not going to small group.
No worries.
Good. No. Guys, talk. What did you think about
I'm
those slides? Did you
lurking.
see those, all those?
Emily,
Yes.
I don't know how to
Love.
select a group.
sure, Donna, I'll move you. You're in group 1, right? Yeah.
Hey,
It
Bruce, I don't know.
says you're already there.
Is this group 1?
No. Here.
Yes, Haley. This.
Donna, I'm gonna move you back to the main session, which you are already in, and then try it again. I'm not sure what's going on.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, I think there's an option to pause the recording so that when because does this get posted? So then they don't watch the dead time from small group.
Yeah, I
If,
think,
if
I'm
that
supposed to pause the
matters.
recording. Yeah, well, we can just cut it out.
On
I
it,
will pause it.